Tonight I'm supposed to give a talk on contemplation of dharmas, the mindfulness of dharmas, as well as a talk on the 5 hindrances. It can be quite technical, so I hope you will be able to bear with me. Now, the mindfulness of dharma or mental objects is, as you know, part of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. In fact, it is the last foundation mentioned in the series of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Now, normally when we talk of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, we always talk about body foundation first, followed by feelings, and then consciousness or mind, and finally mental objects. Now, you will notice that we always proceed from body, feelings, consciousness, and mental objects. Now, there is a reason for this. It is not arbitrarily arranged. Now, to a yogi who comes into the vipassana practice, he is always advised to go and start with the body foundations of mindfulness first. Now, the reason being, the body foundation of mindfulness is easier to grasp because the body is very gross. You can be mindful of it easily. Now, after going through the mindfulness of the body, the next will be the feelings, and so on and so forth. You will notice that these foundations of mindfulness vary in their degree of subtleness. So, in other words, mindfulness of mental object is the most subtle. It is the most difficult foundation to practice. That is why we do not advise yogis who are beginners to take the basic object of the mental objects as the main foundation for their practice. Right? We always advise you to stick to the body foundation first until you're very well versed. Then you can go and proceed on to the other foundations. Now, many yogis may choose to do more than one foundation, which they may claim will be suited to their temperaments. Now, what do you mean by this? Now, it does not mean to say that a person is restricted to only practicing one foundation of mindfulness. For example, if you're practicing contemplation of the body, we do not say you're not allowed to do contemplation of feelings or not allowed to do contemplation of consciousness. You can do it. It's just that we do not want you to stick only to, let's say, mindfulness of consciousness or only to mindfulness of mental objects. Now, the reason being, as I mentioned earlier, the 3rd and 4th foundation of mindfulness is rather subtle, so it may not be too suitable for beginners. So the important thing in this practice is we must have a firm foothold in the body foundation of mindfulness. Always bear in mind, the body foundation of mindfulness is the most important for us all. Okay? Now, it is easier to maintain one's mindfulness through the practice of the body foundation, especially when conditions are difficult in daily life. Now, sometimes there are some yogis who may disregard advice, or rather, who may choose to practice their own way. There are cases of people who have chosen to practice only mindfulness of the mind or mindfulness of consciousness in their daily life, and they have got into a lot of serious difficulties. Especially so when they are not well established or firmly established in the body foundation of mindfulness. Now, for instance, in the daily life, if you have to work in an office, you have to take care of your kids, you have to interact with people. You can't be watching your mind all the time, right? Thoughts, thinking, planning, and then you won't get things done. It is not very practical. Now, in such instances, we I would prefer you to be more generally aware of your movements, whether you be walking, sitting, or standing, and so on and so forth. Apply general mindfulness rather than to meditate intensively on the mind or mental objects. In fact, if we do not have a strong body foundation, we can actually end up quite lost as to what is the best thing to do if our mind goes haywire. For example, on certain days, even in my case, on certain days you can get very down, or you can get very confused, or you can get very angry, or you can get depressed, and so on and so forth. Now, if you try to meditate on your depression, your frustration, your anger, it can only get worse, because you are not in a position to be able to note this clearly, because mindfulness has already dropped to a very low level, so it is not difficult to meditate on such states of mind. Now, in this case, what you should do is try to be more mindful of your walking, sitting, rise and fall, touching, and so on. Okay? Now, earlier on we mentioned beginners are not encouraged to use mindfulness of consciousness or mental objects as their main foundation. Now, you also heard that the consciousness or mental objects can be very subtle. Now, the reason being is your mind or your thoughts arise and pass away so quickly that you won't be able to grasp them with ease. In fact, they are quite difficult to grasp satisfactorily. You try to note thinking, you try to note wandering. About 90% of the time, your mind will still wander and you are left just labeling, not being able to catch up with the stream of thoughts that is going on. Okay? They are so subtle, very difficult to catch. Sometimes you may think you are actually noting them. For example, noting, thinking. But that noting may not actually come with the mindfulness. You're actually labeling without mindfulness. So it is not something easy to do. Now, it is only when our minds, or mindfulness rather, and concentration becomes developed to a high degree that we resort to the last two foundations. What we are trying to say here is, unless your mindfulness is developed to a high level or high degree, you do not normally proceed on to the foundation of mindfulness of the mind or of mental objects. And in the case of people who have meditated for a long time, maybe 10 years, 20 years, even in advanced stages of concentration or mindfulness, you still need the body foundation, even right to the very end, and you cannot afford to drop it off. You still need the rise and fall, and you still need to watch, sitting, touching. So that's why we say body foundation is very, very important. Because when you go into deeper states of mind, sometimes the consciousness occurs so fast that you are not able to catch up with them. Even if you are very mindful, you may not be able to catch all the thoughts. And now in that instance, sometimes you have to resort to catching the rising and falling again, or watching the touch points. Now, according to the Buddhist commentary, mindfulness of mental objects is suitable for the very intellectual types. Intellectual people are not necessarily smart by conventional terms. We're not talking about professors or PhD holders. Here, intellectual means those Buddhists or those people who are interested in cultivating a mind and who happen to have a talent for investigating things and trying to find answers out for themselves. We are referring to more of those people rather than people with high worldly knowledge. So in such cases, mindfulness of mental objects can be very suitable. Now let us go set the pace a bit faster because I think I speak too slowly, then you all may fall asleep. Now, last session, you heard Brother James Ong talk about the mindfulness of consciousness or mind. Now, there is a distinct difference, however subtle, between mindfulness of consciousness and mindfulness of mental objects. Now, of course, we say there is a difference, but in actual practice, sometimes we may not be able to differentiate when we are watching the mind and when we are actually watching the mental objects. Okay? For example, if you are talking about anger, now all of you may know that anger is basically a mental state or mental object. Now when that anger, which is a mental state, arises, now it will sort of taint or dirty the whole mind, isn't it? It will affect the whole consciousness. So when we are noting anger, sometimes we may not be too sure whether we are actually practicing the third foundation or the fourth foundation. And we may say anger, anger, anger. It may be mindfulness of consciousness, and we note anger, anger, anger. It may be also the foundation of watching of mental objects. So it is not too easy or not too clear in actual practice. Yeah? Now, to differentiate from mental objects and mindfulness of consciousness, one thing we can say is that in the mindfulness of mental objects, we tend to see the interrelationships, or rather the connections between the objects of our contemplation. For example, if you are watching anger, if it is mindfulness of consciousness, we are merely aware of the of the arising or the passing away of the anger. That is when we are doing the third foundation, mindfulness of anger. We are aware of the arising and passing away. But in the case where we practice the mindfulness of mental objects, when anger arises, not only are we aware of the arising and passing of anger, but also the conditions for the origination of such anger, and also the conditions where this anger becomes completely dissolved. In other words, we not only are aware of the rising and falling anger, but we know actually the causes of the anger and also the cause or the reason when the anger does not arise anymore. Now I shall illustrate an example. For example, if you are noting anger. Now, in the process of noting anger, you will know, inside, intuitively you will know, this anger has arisen because I failed to note the thoughts that were before, that arose before. For example, while you're meditating, suddenly a face appears. It happens to be your enemy, somebody you don't like. Yeah? Now you forgot to note. Yeah? So you allowed your mind to wander, and it so happened that your wandering mind came across an enemy of yours. You forgot to note. Then anger arose. This silly old man or this young man or whoever it is, I wish I could just give him a slap on the face. So the stream of thoughts carries on, isn't it? And then you realize, I was not mindful. I'm not mindful. Now I have to note. Noting anger. So you actually know the reason why the anger arose. And you actually know when the anger started. As you note, the anger becomes less and less. As your mindfulness increases, the anger will become less and less, and eventually it will stop, isn't it? Because when you note anger, you're applying mindfulness, and finally the anger stops. And then you know for yourself, well, anger seems to have stopped, and I know that stopping is due to the fact that I noted it intensively. I applied mindfulness and noted the anger, and it became, and it went away. So, to reiterate, to repeat, when we are actually practicing mindfulness of mental objects, we not only know the arising and the disappearance of the phenomena, but we also know the reasons causing the phenomena to arise and the reasons why the phenomena went away. Now, this knowing is not thinking. It doesn't mean while you're meditating you are thinking, oh, A equals B equals C equals D, therefore, no, it's not like that. This understanding or knowing the conditions for the anger to arise actually comes about through our own realization, as we note it intensively. It's through our own realization rather than thinking about it or imagining about it. Now, anger arises as a result of our ignorance because we failed to note it before. So it arises because of ignorance, and one understands that ignorance of the real nature of things gives rise to anger. As one meditates and notes the anger that has arisen with mindfulness, anger then ceases. Yes? Thus, one understands the truth. Now, from our own meditative experience, we realize that anger is a completely unsatisfactory state, which induces a lot of mental suffering. Can we be happy when we are angry or mad with someone? It's impossible. In fact, anger is like mental torment. So when we note anger, we realize that anger is actually indeed suffering. Now this is the realization of the truth of suffering, or dukkha. Now we realize that we got angry because we failed to be mindful of the thoughts that preceded the anger. That is to say, we were ignorant, we were not mindful. Now this is the truth of the cause of suffering. And what's the cause of suffering? Because we were ignorant. We did not note the thoughts before. Now when we noted the anger with mindfulness, it disappears. Now this is the truth of the cessation of suffering. We realize that by applying mindfulness or clear awareness, we are able to stop the stream of anger which has given us so much mental pain. Now this is called the truth of the way to the cessation of suffering. Thus, in the mindfulness of mental objects, one is not just aware of the arising and passing away of anger, but also understands the causal conditions for its arising and passing as well. Now it should be stressed that this understanding is not induced by specious thinking or reasoning, but rather through the realization that occurs by actual meditative experience. Now, through the practice of the mindfulness of mental objects, one not only knows the way to dispel dangerous and harmful thoughts, but also knows how to increase positive mental states which may be lacking, so that the mind becomes well balanced and ripe for the attainment of the supramundane, that is to say, nibbana. It is only through the Aryan path that our mental defilements are put to an end once and for all. Right, I hope you're clear on this. Means when we practice mindfulness of mental objects, we know how to get rid of defiling and dangerous thoughts. And at the same time, we also know how to induce positive states of mind. Okay? Now this is quite a clear distinction from mindfulness of consciousness. Now in the Satipatthana Sutta, the practice of the mindfulness of mental objects is divided into 5 categories. Now first group, we have the 5 hindrances. Second group, the 5 aggregates of clinging. Third group, the 6 internal and 6 external sense bases. Number 4, the 7 factors of enlightenment. And finally, group 5, the Four Noble Truths. As time does not permit us so much, we only go through them at a glance. Perhaps we will put more emphasis on the 5 hindrances. Now the 5 hindrances are sensual desire. Sometimes we just call it greed. Second one is ill will or anger. Third will be sloth and torpor. Fourth will be restlessness and worry. Fifth one will be skeptical doubts. Now, why do these 5 hindrances arise during our meditation? The reason being is that our mind has a way of thinking in a very improper way. Improper way of thinking is sometimes called unwise attention. Unwise attention is the food or the nourishment of the hindrances. Now, if the hindrances have not a reason, it will arise if we have unwise attention. If a reason, it cannot be abandoned. And if it has been abandoned, it will arise again. So hindrances are a very stubborn lot. For example, when you're noting sloth and torpor or sleepiness, you realize that you will not go away. It may disappear for a while, then suddenly comes back again, and then you are really given one big punch and you feel like sleeping. Okay? So hindrances are a very stubborn lot. Now, if we look at objects as something desirable, then that becomes the food of sensual desire. For example, we look at a flower, if we forget to note seeing, we are so taken by the flower and then you decide to pluck it. Sensual desire arises because of unwise attention. Okay? Now, if you think of objects in a very disgusting way, then that becomes the food for ill will. For example, you look at somebody, basically people have features which are neutral. It is only our minds which think of it as ugly or beautiful and so on. So if we think of a person in a very disgusting way, then naturally the food for ill will or anger will arise. Now if we think of objects as boring or unaccomplishable, then that becomes the food of sloth and torpor. For example, while you're watching a rising and falling, after some time you feel very sleepy and you say, wow, it's boring watching rising and falling. And then you feel like sleeping. And you say, what is this rising and falling? Can I get anything out of it? Then sloth and torpor will become heavier and heavier. Your eyelids become heavier and heavier, and eventually you doze off. Okay? Now, if you think of objects beyond the state of being mindful of the present, then that becomes the food of restlessness and worry. While watching rising and falling, suddenly you remember, oh boy, I got a lot of work in office. Tomorrow I've got to get this done. The other day somebody was telling me during meditation he had to worry about his work. Right? Now these are things that will always arise in our mind. Because we keep thinking about the future, keep thinking about the past, and not staying in the present moment. That is our problem. And if we think of objects in many ways, without close scrutiny, then the food for skeptical doubts will arise. For example, while watching rising and falling or sitting and touching, then you think to yourself, am I doing the right thing? Are the instructors giving me the correct instructions? Is there any guarantee I will not go mad? Is it really possible that I can get Nibbana through just watching rising and falling? Now all these are what they call skeptical doubts. Skeptical in the sense that we still have a lot of disbelief, disbelief without actually investigating further. Okay? It's just like, for example, somebody tries to sell you a product, maybe tries to introduce you into a kind of multi-level marketing, and you have never done any sales in your life. Somebody says you can make a few $1,000, and you say, I don't believe, something like that. The skeptical doubt is also something like that. Without examining further, you already start disbelieving it. So, skeptical doubts is not healthy in the sense that it may stop you from practicing. Okay? And sometimes we may mistake doubts for ideas. We may think that we have a lot of brilliant ideas. We start questioning the teaching, start questioning the instructors, because we think we have brilliant ideas. Maybe this guy doesn't know. Well, such ideas are actually doubts. So when they occur, you must make sure that you note them mindfully. Doubt. Note it. Okay? Otherwise, we'll be so lost in a world of our own delusions. A world of delusions of our own making. Okay? Now, when we contemplate on the hindrances, which I mentioned just now, you should note them clearly every moment they are present. It means the moment anger arises, the moment lust arises, the moment worry arises, the moment skeptical doubts arises, we should be already catching those mental states. We should note them immediately. Don't watch them casually. Don't just allow them to go on without noting them clearly and intensively. Now sometimes when we are watching anger or watching lust, suddenly these hindrances can become very strong. For example, you're watching anger, gosh, the anger suddenly has increased 2 or 3 times and you're not able to handle it. You say, wow, fantastic, I was just noting anger, it suddenly has sort of increased, and what am I going to do? Now don't worry. If the anger or lust or worry or whatever has increased, just note them that they have increased. Just keep on noting. There is nothing special you should do except just keep on noting them. Eventually, even the strongest of all mental states will also pass away. Okay? Now, when these states of mind are abandoned, then you should note that they are abandoned. That means the moment they are finished, you should know they are finished. And also the reasons or the causes for their abandonment. And if they do not rise again, then you should note the fact that they do not rise again anymore. Okay? Don't try and look for them. For example, if you just overcome lust after sitting 15 minutes, wow, I won the victory. And then after that, you're wondering whether it has really gone away. Again it comes back. And so don't try to invite trouble. The moment they are gone, forget about them. Watch your rising, falling, or sitting, touching. Okay? Now, hindrances arise because of unwise attention, and we can only abandon them by wise attention. That is, the proper attending of the mind in the correct way. Now, if we have sensual desire in our hearts, then we should reflect. Sometimes we should reflect that in reality, what you call beauty is in fact quite ugly. You don't believe? You just cut a piece of skin and put it under a microscope. You see how beautiful it is. Right? So when sensual desire arises, then you should contemplate on the ugliness of the real ugliness of the nature of things. Now, if we have a lot of hate towards somebody and that hate doesn't want to go away, then we should also radiate metta or loving kindness so that it goes away. Now, if we are very lazy and sleepy and we just can't seem to do anything about it, then we should try and put in more effort. Try and sit straight. Note the rising and falling. Don't allow yourself to fall asleep. Put in more effort. Then hopefully the sloth and torpor or laziness will go away. If you watch the rising and falling clearly, following every movement or every sensation all the time, then it is possible that you will be able to get rid of the hindrance of restlessness. You know what is restlessness? Restlessness means thinking a lot, thinking about the future, thinking about the past. But if your mind is able to follow arising and falling, then this hindrance of restlessness will also go away. Now, when watching the hindrances, or whatever thoughts that arise, or whatever phenomena that arises, now we should see clearly whether the mental states are pure or impure, whether they cause suffering or they bring happiness, whether they will defile your mind or purify the mind, or whether they ought to be cultivated or not to be cultivated. Now in doing so, then we will be free from skeptical doubts. For example, you are sitting, rising and falling. Oh yeah, this method, whether it's really good for me or not. A doubt has arisen. Then you ask yourself, but this is the way to the purification of the mind. If this is the way to purification of the mind, then I should practice it. It is something that is good, isn't it? It will not cause me any harm. I will not kill anybody. So by reflecting this way, then you will be able to overcome skeptical doubts. We next come to the 5 aggregates of clinging. First, 5 aggregates of clinging means those components of the mind and body that constitutes what you call the you and the me, or the I within inverted commas. Actually, the so-called I is nothing but the 5 aggregates of clinging. Okay. Now the first aggregate is called matter. In Pali it is called rupa khandha. Now it is the conditioned non-conscious phenomena such as the elements of rigidity, cohesion, heat and motion. It is that which constitute the physical or material aspect of the world, including beings. This aggregate is called matter. In Pali it is called rupa khandha. Now it is the conditioned non-conscious phenomena such as the elements of rigidity, cohesion, heat and motion. It is that which constitute the physical or material aspect of the world, including beings. In other words, rupa khandha or matter is the physical manifestation of beings. Okay, it means the heat element, element of cohesion, element of motion. All these are manifestations of matter. Okay, that is one of the aggregate. Now the second aggregate is vedana khandha, or feelings. Now feelings can be pleasant, they can be painful, and they can also be neutral. And then feelings can also be mental or physical. When we talk about pleasant, painful or neutral, we can also talk about whether these feelings arises because of from the mind or from the physical base. For example, a mosquito bite you, usually it's the physical pain, isn't it? But if you get angry, you're distressed, you want to wall up the mosquito, then it becomes mental pain. Okay? So, feelings is what constitutes the emotional aspect. Feeling is always emotional. Some people are very emotional over music, very sentimental about friends and so on and so forth. It causes a lot of suffering, no doubt. Number 3 is the aggregate of perception. In Pali we call it sanya khandha. Sometimes in English we use the term memory for want of a better term. It is the aggregate which remembers things. Whatever we recognize and whatever we register and store in the mind, that is the aggregate of perception. The cognitive element is called perception. Now number 4 is the sankhara khandha, or the aggregate of mental formations. Mental formations here means mental states. which includes thinking. Now, without going into the Abhidhamma, you may not be able to understand what these mental states are. But basically, they are those things that are going on in our head. The dreaming, the wandering, all the rubbish. That is a mental formation. All the fantasies, all those things, all imaginations, all our imagined enemies, all because of our mental formations. And number 5, the aggregate of consciousness. Consciousness is what that knows, or what is conscious of. For example, the body or matter is something which does not know, isn't it? For example, a table is matter. Now, it is not able to experience pain. But in the case of a human being, we have a body, we have a mind. So the body, although it does not know, cannot experience pain or pleasure, it is the consciousness, that mental phenomena, which knows or which experiences. So the 5th aggregate, consciousness, is that which knows or experiences. So in reality, the so-called I or me or you is an aggregation of matter, of feelings, of perceptions, of mental formations, of consciousness. There is no such thing as an eternal soul or self apart from the 5 aggregates. So there is no soul or self from the 5 aggregates. It is all these 5 aggregates that gives us the idea that there is a self or soul. But if you break up the constituents, the matter and mind, into their constituents, there is nothing really there except for all these 5 things. Okay, we go to the next one, 6 sense bases. We're running out of time. Now here it means observing the eye door, ear door, nose, tongue, body door, and mind door. When you see something, you're not seeing. Now seeing is 2 parts. One is the object. The second one will be the sense basis. For example, when we look at something, seeing, there is not only the physical object, but also the eye base, isn't it, which sees it. Eye base is a mental phenomena, right? So when we meditate on seeing, if your mindfulness is very sharp, you can even differentiate the eye object from the eye base. And that one is not easy, unless your mindfulness is sharp, you can actually separate. This is the eye object, this is the eye base. Similarly for smelling, nose base, tasting, tongue base, touching, the body base, and so on. You can actually know that there are 2 processes involved. One is the external object, one the sense base. So you meditate on this. Now when we are meditating on the sense bases and the objects, we must always be careful against the arising of concepts. For example, when you are noting seeing, do not allow yourself to form concepts about the objects we are seeing. We should only note seeing, or colors. Not beautiful, or square, or triangle, because those are concepts. Concepts are not very, they are not ultimate realities, okay? We should only just note seeing as seeing, hearing as hearing. In fact, there was one advice given by the Buddha to a layman called Bahiya. He says, Bahiya, you should train yourself. In what is seen, there must be only the seen. In what is heard, there must only be the heard. In what is sensed, as smell, taste, or touch, there must be only what is sensed. In what is thought, there must be only what is thought. Right? For example, every time they're seeing, you note seeing, hearing, smelling. And apparently, Bahiya at that time was so highly developed that after listening to this, practiced for only a few moments and he gained arahantship, the highest level of enlightenment. So mindfulness of the internal and external sense bases will tear away all views about the self. We see that there is no such thing as a being, there is no such thing as a self or someone behind us, but just processes, physical and mental processes. Well, we are running short of time. Anyway, we have 2 more groups to go. I'll just go through the 7 factors of enlightenment. Now, 7 factors of enlightenment means you are contemplating on, number 1, mindfulness, number 2, investigation of dharmas, number 3, energy, number 4, joy, number 5, tranquility, number 6, concentration, and number 7, equanimity. Now, when we are mindful of mindfulness, it means that we are able to recollect and aware of every kind of experience. You can be mindful of mindfulness. You can also be mindful when your mind doesn't seem to be mindful at all. For example, when you're not mindful, you're aware you're not mindful. That is being mindful. Now, this mindfulness is very helpful because in case any of the 6 other factors of enlightenment, for example, joy, energy or concentration is not there, that mindfulness will know, and it can also induce the energy to arise if it is not there. It can also induce concentration to arise if it is not there. So mindfulness is very important. It is the chief. Without mindfulness, all the other 6 factors may not be balanced. Now, when we talk about investigation of dharmas, it is the state, or rather it is the mental state which investigates whether a consciousness is moral or immoral, that means pure or not pure, whether it should be abandoned or should be cultivated. Now, it is also the factor that arouses wisdom and chooses the meditation objects that are suitable for our temperament. Okay, that is the Dharma investigation factor. Then you have Virya, energy factor. For example, when you're really lazy, then this is the mental factor that gives us the charge to note again. Charges at the back, note, so that we are not lazy. Because if you don't have the energy factor, you just allow your mind to go on like that. But chances are the mind will become slower and slower and slower. Eventually, you doze off to sleep. Right? So energy or effort is very important here. Because effort will abandon bad states of mind, and effort also will help us to develop good states of mind. Next factor is joy. Now this is important as it creates pleasurable interest in our practice. Sometimes when we practice, noting, there may come to a time when we are completely, not say bored, you're not really bored, but it's something like a bored state of mind. You feel like it's very dry. You see a lot of passing away, a lot of falling, you see things happening so fast. It becomes quite a chore, especially when you're watching pain. Oh, fantastic. When will it ever go away? No, it doesn't go away. It becomes stronger, and you can get very, very upset sometimes. Now, without this joy, then we won't have the interest to carry on. If the factor of joy arises, even pain can become something pleasant to watch. Some people may find it strange. How come when there's pain, there's also joy? Now, the joy is not in the pain, but it's rather from the mental, rather from the joy from the mind, in the mind. When you're watching the pain is one thing, but there's also the possibility that your mind experiences the joy. It means from within the mind. Now, how do we arouse joy? We must recollect on the virtues of the triple gems. We also reflect on our good deeds that we have done. We have kept our 5 precepts well. We kept our 8 precepts well, and we have been doing a lot of dana. We've been doing a lot of good service. So by reflecting on these things, joy will arise. well, after all, I'm not such a bad guy after all. And then you have the encouragement or the motivation to practice. Then you have tranquility, pasadi, which is actually the calmness of the mind and body. Now this calmness can be supported by suitable and comfortable conditions of food. If you have good food, you have nice weather, maybe you meditate in an air-conditioned room, you have nice company, then this calmness will arise. Okay, so it is also one of the factors. Then you have concentration or samadhi, which is the steady mind that is one-pointed, that doesn't run away. And this is called concentration. It is not distracted, and its function is to stop wandering mind. And it has happiness as its manifestation. It is accomplished by overcoming and soothing the mind and being equanimous in all states with regards to the objects. And lastly, you have upekkha, which is the balanced state of mind. That means the mind which is perfectly balanced, no excess of energy, no excess of concentration, everything is perfect. You have lots of mindfulness, you have just energy which is just balanced with concentration and so on. And equanimity is not something which will react with likes or dislikes. For example, if you have equanimity, even a person scolds you, you don't get angry. Even misfortunes befall you, you won't get sad. Even you have a nice and fantastic meditation session, you won't be overly happy and then lose your footing. So equanimity is also another important factor. Actually, we have one more grouping called the Four Noble Truths. We don't have much time, so I think we'll finish off here. But maybe we'll just mention that the Four Noble Truths and contemplation is, you not only look at the defilement, or you look at the impure state of mind. You not only look at its origination and its passing away, but you also know the way to overcome them. For example, when you're noting anger. When anger arises, you note them. You know the reason why the anger arises, because you were not mindful of what happened just now. So you know anger. Positive states of mind, that means it gives rise to new mindfulness. You're able to follow rising and falling clearly, and you're able to observe each and every phenomena that arises clearly, right? And then these new positive states of mind will increase your awareness and concentration even more and more. And eventually, if the faculties or the factors of enlightenment are balanced, then you will be able to realize what you have all been striving for. And that is to see and realize Nibbana, enlightenment itself. So the Four Noble Truths is not just knowing the causes of suffering and seeing into the cessation of suffering, but also knows the way to arouse wholesome states of mind that will lead you to Nibbana. So I shall end this talk tonight. Maybe now we shall proceed on to our regular meditation practice. Thank you.